Danny Rodriguez was 8 years old when he died. He had been playing with toy ships in the corner of his family's small apartment on Kepler 442b when the Zerion soldiers broke down their door. The boy looked up from his games with wide brown eyes as the tall gray aliens filled the room with their strange clicking language and metal weapons that hummed with energy. His mother Maria screamed and reached for him, but the soldiers pushed her back with the flat sides of their weapon barrels. His father Carlos tried to fight, but 3 Zerions held him against the wall, while a 4th pressed a stunning device to his neck. Danny did not understand what was happening. The Zerions had been on their world for only 2 weeks since they invaded the human colony. His parents had told him to stay inside and be quiet, but they never explained why the skyships had come or why the tall gray beings now walked through their streets. The boy had seen them through his window and thought they looked like the aliens in his picture. Books, except these ones, carried real weapons and made people disappear. The Zerion commander stood 7 feet tall with pale, gray skin that looked like old leather. His eyes were large and black without any white parts, and when he looked at Danny, the boy felt cold inside. The commander spoke in perfect English, which surprised everyone in the room, because most humans had never heard a Zerion speak their language before. He said that resistance fighters had destroyed a supply depot that morning and killed 12 Zerion soldiers. He said that humans would learn the price of defying the Empire. Maria Rodriguez begged them not to take her son. She offered herself instead, and when that did not work, she offered information about the resistance fighters she claimed to know. The commander listened to her pleas without changing his expression, then ordered his soldiers to take the boy. Danny cried for his mother as they carried him away, and the sound echoed through the apartment building, until other doors slammed, shut, and the hallways fell silent. 3 days later, every screen on 17 worlds lit up with the same broadcast. The Zerion High Command had decided to send a message that would reach every human settlement in their territory and beyond. They wanted to show what happened when humans dared to fight against their rule. The execution would be broadcast live across space using quantum relay networks that could send signals faster than light itself. Danny sat in a metal chair that was too big for him in the center of a large white room. The walls were covered with Zerion symbols, and the Empire's banner hung behind him like a dark curtain. He wore the same clothes he had been playing in 3 days before, and his face was dirty with tears. The boy kept looking around the room as if searching for his parents, but they were not there. They were locked in a detention center on the other side of the colony. The Zerion tribunal consisted of 5 high-ranking officials who sat behind a curved table facing the camera. They wore ceremonial robes that marked their positions in the Empire and spoke in their clicking language while translators provided subtitles in dozens of human languages. They read charges against the human colony and declared that an example must be made to prevent further resistance. Commander Vexthul stepped forward to address the camera directly. He explained that humans had proven themselves to be violent and unpredictable creatures who could not be trusted to follow imperial law. He said that the destruction of the supply depot was an act of terrorism that demanded swift justice. The death of one human child would save the lives of countless Zerion soldiers who would otherwise die fighting human resistance movements. Danny did not understand the trial or the charges, or why everyone was looking at him through the cameras. He asked when he could see his mother and father again, but no one answered him. A Zerion guard brought him water in a metal cup, and the boy drank it gratefully because he had been thirsty for hours. The water tasted strange and made him feel sleepy, but he tried to stay awake because he was scared. On Earth, the broadcast interrupted every program on every network. In offices and homes and schools, people stopped what they were doing to watch their screens. At first, many thought it was some kind of mistake or propaganda video, but the quantum signatures proved the transmission was real and happening live. Admiral Kate Sullivan was in a meeting with her staff officers at Luna Base when her aide burst through the doors and told her to look at the main display. The execution was swift and clinical. A Zerion technician activated a device that stopped Danny's heart in seconds. The boy slumped forward in the chair and did not move again. The camera held on his still form for several long moments before Commander Vexthul stepped back into view. He announced that this was the fate of all humans who defied the Empire and warned that further resistance would result in more executions. The broadcast ended, but the images remained burned into the minds of everyone who had watched. On Earth, angry crowds gathered in the streets outside government buildings demanding action. Military bases went to full alert as officers tried to process what they had just witnessed. Dr. Benjamin Clark threw his research tablet against the wall of his laboratory on Mars and watched it shatter into pieces. Admiral Sullivan sat in silence for 10 minutes after the broadcast ended. Her hands were pressed flat against the conference table and her knuckles were white. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but her words carried a weight that made everyone in the room understand that something fundamental had changed. She ordered her communications officer to open a priority channel to Earth Central Command and every other human military installation in known space. The message went out within the hour using the same quantum relay networks that had carried Danny's execution to the stars. It was simple and direct and carried the authority of humanity's highest military command. Operation Reckoning was now active, and every human, ship and soldier in base was ordered to prepare for total war against the Zerion Empire. President Lisa Carter received the military recommendations in her office deep beneath the capital city. She read through the proposed response plans while images of Danny Rodriguez played on repeat on every news channel across Earth. The boy's face had already become a symbol that united humanity in a way that nothing else ever had. When she signed the authorization orders, her signature was steady and clear. The first changes began within hours of the broadcast ending. President Lisa Carter stood before the United Earth Assembly in an emergency session that had been called for the middle of the night. Representatives from every human world that could establish communication had joined the session through quantum links, and their faces filled wall screens around the great chamber. Carter had been president for 6 years and had always been known for her calm diplomatic approach to interspecies relations, but the woman who stepped up to the podium that night was someone entirely different. She began her speech with a simple statement that would be remembered for centuries. She said that humanity had just learned what their enemies thought of human children, and now the galaxy would learn what humans were truly capable of when they were united in purpose. The assembly hall fell silent as she continued speaking in a voice that carried across space to every human settlement and ship and station. She declared that the Zerion Empire had just made the greatest mistake in their long history. The president announced that Earth was immediately invoking the total war protocols that had been written into human law but never used since the colony ships first left Earth 300 years ago. Every human military unit would be placed under unified command, and every human world would contribute to the war effort according to their capabilities. There would be no negotiations with the Zerions and no mercy shown to those who had murdered an innocent child on live television. Military commanders across human space received their activation orders through encrypted quantum channels that could not be intercepted or jammed by enemy forces. Admiral Kate Sullivan found herself appointed as Supreme Commander of Human Forces, with authority over every ship and soldier and weapon that humanity possessed. The promotion came with access to classified military programs that she had never known existed, including weapons research projects that had been developed in secret for decades. Captain Ryan Foster was eating dinner with his crew aboard the heavy cruiser New Orleans when the orders came through. The ship was patrolling the outer edge of human territory near the Zerion border and had been on routine duty for the past 8 months. Foster read the classified briefing twice before he believed what he was seeing. The New Orleans and every other human warship was being ordered to implement Protocol 7, which meant total war against an enemy species with no restrictions on weapons or tactics. The crew response was immediate and universal. Every sailor and officer and technician aboard the New Orleans had watched Danny Rodriguez die on their screens, and they were ready for revenge. Chief Engineer Lucy Barnes began preparations to overload the ship's reactors if necessary, to maximize weapon output. Weapons Officer Dan Murphy started calculating firing solutions for every Zerion target within their patrol area. Navigator Sue Williams plotted courses that would take them deep into enemy territory. On the industrial world of Titan, the transformation began before dawn. Factory Supervisor Patricia Moore received a direct order from Earth Central Command to convert her civilian shipyard to military production within 72 hours. The facility had been building exploration vessels and cargo haulers for the past 20 years, but the new orders called for warships of a design that Moore had never seen before. The blueprints came with priority codes that gave her unlimited access to materials and personnel from across the solar system. Moore gathered her shift supervisors in the main assembly hall and showed them the news, footage of Danny's execution followed by the new production orders. She told them they would be working around the clock until further notice, and that anyone who wanted to quit could leave immediately with full pay and no questions asked. Not a single worker left the hall. Instead, they began organizing teams and scheduling shifts that would keep the assembly lines running without interruption. The shipyard's first military vessel rolled off the production line 60 hours later. The destroyer was 300 meters long and carried enough firepower to level a small city. Moore named it the Danny Rodriguez and painted the boy's name on the hull, in letters large enough to be seen from orbit. Similar scenes played out on manufacturing worlds throughout, human space as civilian facilities, converted to military production with a speed and efficiency that surprised even their own governments. Dr. Benjamin Clark received new orders at his research facility on Mars that changed his role from xenobiologist to biological weapons specialist. The transformation troubled him deeply, because he had spent his career studying alien life forms in order to find ways for humans to coexist peacefully with other species. Now his extensive knowledge of Zerion biology and physiology would be used to develop weapons, specifically designed to kill them. Clark's laboratory became a classified facility overnight with security measures that prevented anyone from entering or leaving without authorization. His research team expanded from 12 scientists to over 200 as specialists arrived from universities and corporations across human space. Their new mission was to create biological agents that would affect only Zerions while leaving other species unharmed. The work proceeded with frightening efficiency. Clark's team had been studying Zerion biology for 15 years, and they understood the aliens' immune systems and genetic structure better than the Zerions understood it themselves. Within days, they had identified several biological vulnerabilities that could be exploited using modified Earth viruses and bacteria. The weapons they created were elegant and deadly and completely undetectable by standard Zerion medical scanners, military. Recruitment centers on every human world were overwhelmed by volunteers who wanted to join the fight against the Zerions. The images of Danny Rodriguez being murdered had created a level of unity among humans that had never existed before. People who had never considered military service were demanding the right to carry weapons and fight for their species. Training facilities expanded to handle 10 times their normal capacity as humanity mobilized for total war. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Hayes commanded a special forces unit that had been training for deep strike missions against alien targets. His soldiers were experts in stealth operations and had been preparing for theoretical conflicts with hostile alien species for years. Now their training would be put to real use as they prepared to infiltrate Zerion territory and strike at targets that conventional forces could not reach. Hayes received classified intelligence reports that revealed the locations of every Zerion military installation within 500 light-years of human space. The information had been gathered by human spy networks that most people did not know existed. The reports included detailed analysis of Zerion defenses and suggested that the aliens had become overconfident after centuries of military dominance in their region of space. The mobilization reached every corner of human civilization. Mining colonies in the asteroid belts began producing rare metals needed for advanced weapon systems. Agricultural worlds increased food production to support military forces that would soon number in the millions. Research stations developed new technologies that would give human forces advantages that their enemies could not match. Children on Earth drew pictures of Danny Rodriguez and left them at military bases and government buildings. The boy's face appeared on posters and broadcasts and memorial walls as humanity transformed grief into determination. His death had awakened something in the human spirit that had been sleeping since the species first reached for the stars. Commander Vexthul stood on the observation deck of his fortress world Zerion Prime and watched his fleet patrol the hyperspace routes that connected 17 Zerion systems. The massive orbital stations and defensive platforms that surrounded his world represented the most advanced military technology that the Empire possessed. Zerion Prime had never fallen to an enemy attack in over 800 years, and Vexthul believed it never would. The Zerion High Command had been monitoring human military movement since the execution broadcast, but their intelligence reports suggested that humanity was responding with typical emotional instability rather than Rational military planning. Human ships were moving throughout their territory in patterns that seemed random and desperate. Zephyrian analysts concluded that the humans were preparing for a series of poorly coordinated strikes that could be easily defeated by superior alien strategy and technology. Vexthul had recommended the execution of the human child specifically because he believed that showing weakness would encourage more human resistance. The destruction of the supply depot had killed 12 of his soldiers, and he wanted to ensure that humans understood the price of defying Zephyrian authority. The broadcast had been his idea, and he was proud of how effectively it had demonstrated the Empire's power to crush human opposition. The first sign that something was wrong came from the deep space monitoring stations on the outer edge of Zephyrian territory. Sensor operators reported detecting unusual quantum signatures that suggested large numbers of ships moving through hyperspace, but the signals were too faint and distorted to track accurately. The Zephyrian commanders dismissed the reports as sensor malfunctions caused by solar storm activity in nearby star systems. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Hayes materialized in the upper atmosphere of Zerion Prime at exactly 1400 hours standard time along with 2,000 of humanity's most elite soldiers. The stealth technology that carried them past Zephyrian defenses had been developed in secret laboratories and tested only in computer simulations. The reality exceeded every expectation as human forces appeared inside the most heavily defended system in Zephyrian space without triggering a single alarm. Hayes had studied the tactical layout of Zerion Prime for weeks using intelligence gathered by human spy networks that had been operating in alien territory for decades. The fortress world contained the Empire's largest military academy and served as headquarters for 3 separate Zephyrian fleets. More importantly, it was where Commander Vexthul had planned and ordered the execution that had united humanity in rage. The assault began simultaneously at 47 different locations across the planet's surface. Human strike teams equipped with weapons that had never been used in combat before materialized inside Zephyrian command bunkers and communication centers and weapon storage facilities. The attacks were surgical and brutal and absolutely merciless, as human soldiers carried out orders that came directly from Admiral Sullivan herself. Major Emma Price coordinated orbital bombardments from the stealth destroyer Rachel's Hope, which had been named after a human child killed in an earlier Zephyrian raid. The ship's new quantum torpedoes could penetrate Zephyrian shields and armor with devastating effectiveness. Price's targeting computers had been programmed with the locations of every Zephyrian installation that had any connection to Danny Rodriguez's execution. The bombardment lasted exactly 17 minutes, which was how long Danny had sat in that chair before the Zephyrians killed him. Every government building and military facility and communication station on Zerion Prime was reduced to rubble, while human ground forces hunted down specific individuals, whose names appeared on kill lists that had been compiled by human intelligence services. Dr. Clark's biological weapons were deployed simultaneously on 12 other Zephyrian worlds through delivery systems that the aliens never detected. The modified viruses and bacteria spread through Zephyrian population centers with ruthless efficiency, targeting only members of the species that had murdered a human child on live television. The weapons were designed to cause maximum psychological impact while eliminating military and government personnel who supported the Empire's policies. Captain Foster led a squadron of human warships in the first open space battle against a Zephyrian fleet near the border system of Kalos. The aliens expected to face outdated human vessels using primitive weapons, but instead encountered ships equipped with technology that was decades ahead of anything in their intelligence files. The battle lasted 4 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian force. The New Orleans and her sister ships demonstrated new tactical doctrines that human military planners had developed, specifically for fighting alien enemies. Human vessels used swarm attacks and coordinated maneuvers that overwhelmed Zephyrian targeting systems, while quantum weapons punched through alien shields as if they were made of paper. Foster's crew cheered as each enemy ship exploded, but their captain reminded them that this was only the beginning. Zephyrian colony worlds throughout the Empire began reporting attacks by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere and strike at targets with surgical precision. The humans were not attempting to conquer territory or capture resources, but instead focused on eliminating every individual who had played any role in Danny Rodriguez's execution. The psychological impact was devastating as Zephyrian military officers realized they were being hunted by an enemy they had underestimated. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the attacks from her command ship hidden in the asteroid belt of an uninhabited system. The human fleet had grown to over 3,000 vessels in the week since Danny's death as civilian ships were converted to military use, and new warships rolled off production lines across human space. Every ship carried the boy's name somewhere on its hull, and every crew member had watched the execution broadcast. The Zephyrian Empire's response was confused and ineffective, as their military commanders struggled to understand how humans had developed such advanced technology so quickly. Intelligence reports suggested that humanity had been secretly preparing for war for decades, while publicly pursuing peaceful diplomatic relations. The truth was more frightening because it meant that humans were capable of technological breakthroughs that even advanced alien species could not match. General Paul Martinez led the ground assault on the Zephyrian Military Academy, where future officers of the Empire learned strategy and tactics. The academy had been built into a mountain range that was considered impregnable, but human forces used new drilling equipment to tunnel directly into the facility's core systems. The attack lasted 6 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the academy and the elimination of every instructor and student inside. Commander Vexthul received reports of the attacks from his surviving communication stations, but the information was fragmented and contradictory. His defensive systems had been designed to repel conventional alien invasions, but were completely ineffective against human stealth technology and quantum weapons. The humans were not trying to invade his world, but instead seemed focused on destroying specific targets and eliminating specific individuals. The realization came to him slowly as he studied the pattern of human attacks across Zephyrian space. Every target had some connection to the execution broadcast that he had ordered 3 weeks earlier. Every individual being hunted had participated in or supported the decision to kill Danny Rodriguez. The humans were not fighting a conventional war, but instead carrying out a calculated campaign of revenge against everyone who had harmed their child. Hayes found Vexthul in his command bunker surrounded by the bodies of his staff officers who had tried to defend him. The Zephyrian commander was wounded but alive as human soldiers secured the facility and established a communication link to Admiral Sullivan. The boy's execution had been broadcast across 17 star systems, and now Vexthul's capture would be transmitted to every corner of human space as proof that justice was coming for those who harmed innocent children. The capture of Commander Vexthul sent shockwaves throughout the Zephyrian Empire and beyond, as other alien species watched human forces demonstrate military capabilities that no one had suspected they possessed. The Centaurian Republic and the Andromedan Collective had maintained strict neutrality in the conflict between humans and Zephyrians, but intelligence reports from the front lines were forcing their governments to reconsider their positions. Ambassador Helen Brooks commanded the stealth ship Retribution as it penetrated deep into Zephyrian space, hunting for the remaining officials who had participated in Danny Rodriguez's execution. The vessel was equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology that humanity had ever developed and could remain undetected, even when operating within heavily defended star systems. Brooks had been a diplomat before the war, but now she served as an instrument of justice for the murdered child. The Zephyrian High Senate convened an emergency session on their capital world as reports arrived of human attacks throughout the Empire. Senate leader Vexthul had initially supported the execution broadcast as a necessary demonstration of imperial power, but now he watched his civilization crumble under the relentless assault of an enemy they had underestimated. The humans were not fighting to conquer territory, but instead seemed determined to destroy every trace of Zephyrian authority. General Paul Martinez established his command post in the ruins of Zerion Prime as human forces consolidated their control over the fortress world. His engineers were already converting Zephyrian military facilities into bases for further operations deeper into enemy territory. The capture of the Empire's most important strategic position had opened hyperspace routes that would allow human fleets to strike at the heart of Zephyrian space. Dr. Clark's biological weapons continued spreading through Zephyrian population centers with terrifying efficiency as the modified viruses adapted to local conditions. and evolved to overcome alien immune responses. The weapons were designed to target specific genetic markers that existed only in Zephyrians, while leaving other species completely unharmed. Entire military units disappeared as their members succumbed to diseases that their medical technology could not identify or treat. The psychological impact on Zephyrian society was even more devastating than the physical damage caused by human attacks. A species that had ruled through fear and intimidation for over 1,000 years suddenly found themselves as the hunted rather than the hunters. Zephyrian military officers began deserting their posts and fleeing to neutral territory, while civilian populations demanded protection that their government could no longer provide. Captain Foster led his squadron in a series of raids against Zephyrian supply lines that kept their remaining fleets operational. The New Orleans and her sister ships used hit-and-run tactics that appeared without warning to destroy cargo vessels and fuel depots before vanishing back into hyperspace. Each successful attack weakened the Empire's ability to respond to human advances while demonstrating that nowhere in Zephyrian space was truly safe. The Zephyrians attempted to negotiate through intermediaries from neutral species who offered to broker peace talks between the two civilizations. President Carter received their proposals at her command bunker beneath the capital city and rejected every offer without discussion. Her response was broadcast on the same networks that had carried Danny's execution, and her words were simple and direct. She said that there would be no negotiations and no compromise because the Zephyrians had killed a human child on live television to send a message about their power. Now humanity was sending a message back, and the only acceptable outcome was the complete surrender of everyone who had participated in or approved the boy's murder. The galaxy would learn that harming innocent children carried consequences that no civilization could survive. Admiral Sullivan received intelligence reports indicating that several Zephyrian colonies were attempting to declare independence from the Empire in hopes of avoiding human retaliation. Her response was to dispatch investigation teams that would determine which colonial governments had supported the execution and which had opposed it. Those who had celebrated Danny's death would face the same justice as their imperial masters. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes led Special Operations Forces in a campaign to eliminate every Zephyrian official whose name appeared on the kill lists compiled by human intelligence services. The targets were scattered across dozens of star systems, but human stealth technology made it possible to reach them anywhere they tried to hide. Each successful termination was recorded and broadcast to demonstrate that justice was inevitable. The hunt for war criminals became a systematic operation as human forces worked their way through lists of thousands of individuals who had played roles in the decision to execute Danny Rodriguez. Military officers who had provided security for the broadcast were tracked down and eliminated. Government officials who had approved the execution were found in their hidden bunkers and private estates. Even civilian contractors who had built the execution chamber were held accountable for their participation. Major Price coordinated orbital strikes against Zephyrian government facilities throughout the Empire, using targeting data provided by human spy networks that had been operating in alien territory for decades. The attacks were precisely calculated to destroy symbols of imperial authority while minimizing casualties among civilian populations who had played no role in the child's murder. Zephyrian resistance began collapsing as entire military units surrendered without fighting, rather than face annihilation by human forces equipped with superior technology and unlimited determination. The Empire's command structure disintegrated as officers abandoned their posts and fled to neutral territory or simply disappeared into the chaos of a civilization under assault. The Zephyrian Emperor made his first public appearance since the execution to address his people through emergency broadcasts transmitted from a secure location. He attempted to rally support for continued resistance, but his words rang hollow as human attacks demonstrated the complete failure of imperial military doctrine. The emperor, who had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, now faced enemies who were completely immune to intimidation. Senate Leader Vexthul transmitted a personal message to President Carter, offering to surrender himself and other high-ranking officials in exchange for an end to the human campaign. His proposal included territorial concessions and reparations that would have been unthinkable before the war began. Carter's response was broadcast throughout Zephyrian space, and her words carried the weight of humanity's absolute determination. She said that surrender was not negotiable because justice was not negotiable, and the only acceptable outcome was the complete accountability of everyone who had harmed Danny Rodriguez. The boy had been murdered to demonstrate Zephyrian power, but his death had instead awakened a force that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Captain Brooks transmitted regular updates to Fleet Command as her ship continued hunting targets deep in enemy territory. The Retribution had eliminated 17 high-value officials in the past month, and her crew was developing new techniques for penetrating Zephyrian security systems. Each successful mission brought humanity closer to complete justice for the murdered child. The empire that had seemed invincible just months earlier was now fragmenting under pressure from an enemy that had revealed capabilities beyond anything their intelligence services had imagined possible. Human forces continued advancing toward the Zephyrian capital world, where the final confrontation would determine the fate of both civilizations. The siege of Zephyria Prime began at dawn on the anniversary of Danny Rodriguez's execution, as human fleets emerged from hyperspace to surround the capital world of the empire that had murdered an innocent child. Admiral Sullivan commanded over 4,000 vessels that formed an iron ring around the planet, while ground forces prepared for the final assault that would bring justice for humanity's lost boy. Commander Vexthul made his last stand in the Imperial Palace, where Zephyrian emperors had ruled for 15 centuries, but now found himself abandoned by his own people as the empire collapsed around him. The commander who had ordered Danny's execution was surrounded by human forces and cut off from any hope of escape or reinforcement. His final transmission to the human fleet was an offer of personal surrender in exchange for sparing his homeworld from bombardment. President Carter received Vexthul's surrender offer in her command bunker and discussed it with her military advisors before making a decision that would echo through history. She accepted his surrender, but made clear that justice would be served in the same manner that he had served it to an 8-year-old human child. The execution would be broadcast across the same 17 star systems that had witnessed Danny's death. The trial of Commander Vexthul was held in the same chamber where he had planned the execution that united humanity in rage and determination. Human military judges presided over proceedings that were transmitted live to every corner of known space, as billions of beings watched justice being delivered to those who harmed innocent children. The commander's fate was sealed by his own words as prosecutors played recordings of his orders to kill Danny Rodriguez. Admiral Sullivan personally oversaw Vexthul's execution using the same method that had been used to murder the human child 3 months earlier. The device that stopped his heart was identical to the one used in the broadcast that had awakened humanity's terrible swift sword of vengeance. His death marked the end of the Zephyrian Empire and the beginning of a new order in the galaxy where harming children would never again be tolerated. Dr. Clark established the Rodriguez Institute for Interspecies Relations on the former Zephyrian capital world with a mission to ensure that no species would ever again witness the casual murder of children in the name of political theater. The Institute would study alien cultures and governments to identify potential threats to innocent life, while developing countermeasures that could prevent future tragedies like Danny's execution. General Martinez commanded the YID occupation forces that took control of former Zephyrian territory as human administrators worked to establish stable governments that would respect the rights of all sentient beings. Some worlds joined the growing human confederation willingly, while others were placed under military administration until local populations could demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence. The remaining Zephyrians were relocated to reservation worlds where they could rebuild their society under human oversight and protection. Many had opposed their government's decision to execute Danny Rodriguez and were granted clemency in exchange for cooperation with human authorities. The relocation was carried out humanely, with medical care and educational resources provided to help former Imperial subjects adapt to their new circumstances. Captain Foster received promotion to Admiral and was given command of the Danny Rodriguez Memorial Fleet, which would be dedicated to protecting civilian populations throughout human space and beyond. Every ship in the fleet carried the boy's name and image as a reminder that some lines must never be crossed, and that those who harm the innocent will face the full wrath of humanity. unleashed upon them. The transformation of human civilization was complete as scattered colonies evolved into a unified confederation, capable of projecting power across interstellar distances. The murder of one child had awakened capabilities that had been dormant in the human spirit and revealed to the galaxy that humanity was capable of infinite patience and boundless compassion, but also of terrifying vengeance when their children were threatened. President Carter addressed the United Earth Assembly 1 year after Danny's execution in a speech that defined humanity's new role in galactic affairs. She announced that Earth would offer friendship and protection to any species that respected the rights of innocent beings, while promising swift justice to those who chose the path of violence and oppression. The choice belonged to each civilization, and the consequences would be determined by their actions. The Centaurian Republic and Andromedan Collective immediately established diplomatic relations with humanity and signed treaties guaranteeing the protection of children and civilian populations in their territories. Other species throughout the galaxy sent ambassadors to Earth seeking similar agreements as they recognized that humanity had become a major power that demanded respect and cooperation rather than conquest and domination. Captain Brooks continued commanding deep space patrols aboard the Retribution as human forces maintained vigilance against potential threats to civilian populations throughout known space. Her ship and others like it served as humanity's eyes and ears in distant star systems where new dangers might emerge to threaten the innocent. The lesson of Danny Rodriguez would never be forgotten or ignored. The boys' parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, were rescued from the Zerion detention center where they had been held since their son's capture and brought to Earth, where they established a foundation dedicated to protecting children throughout human space. Their work ensured that Danny's memory would inspire future generations to defend the innocent and uphold the values that made civilization worth preserving. Memorial services for Danny Rodriguez were held simultaneously on every human world as his people remembered the child whose death had transformed their species from peaceful explorers into guardians of justice throughout the galaxy. His image appeared in schools and government buildings and military installations as a reminder that the protection of children was humanity's highest priority and sacred duty. The galaxy had learned fundamental truths about humanity that would influence interspecies relations for centuries to come. Humans were capable of remarkable patience and forgiveness when treated with respect, but they became an unstoppable force of nature when their children were threatened. The choice of which face they showed depended entirely on how other species chose to behave toward the innocent and defenseless. Dr. Clark's research continued at the Rodriguez Institute as human scientists worked to understand alien cultures and prevent future conflicts through education and diplomacy rather than military force. The institute became a center of learning where species throughout the galaxy could study together and develop the mutual understanding necessary for lasting peace among the stars. Years later, historians would mark Danny Rodriguez's execution as the moment when humanity truly came of age as a galactic civilization. The boy's death had been intended to demonstrate Zerion power and human weakness, but instead revealed that harming children awakened something in humans that was far more dangerous than any military force or technological advantage that their enemies could deploy against them. The stars themselves seemed safer in human hands as Earth's fleets patrolled trade routes and protected vulnerable colonies from predators who might otherwise prey upon the weak and defenseless. Danny Rodriguez had not died in vain, because his sacrifice had transformed humanity into protectors of innocence throughout the galaxy and guardians of justice among the stars where children could grow up without fear.